I think F1 is the pinnacle of a data-driven sport. The moment you stop innovating or the moment you stop pushing that technology boundary is the day your competitors leapfrog you. I get to work with computers and race cars.
Yeah.
I mean, what's not to love?
Gary Foote, welcome to Soul of the CIO. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you on. I don't think I could think of like a more interesting sector than F1 to discuss in terms of a relationship between the employee and the technology.
Yep.
And even just before we started filming, you were talking about the technological arms race happening in the sport. I mean, maybe if you, just as a starting point, maybe if you break that down for us,
Sure.
and you talk about even its successes or whether it's evolved too fast or gone too far.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So, technology is underpinning, well, has underpinned F1 for years. So the first kind of basic technology platforms came into the car in maybe the early 1970s. So we were doing sort of data acquisition or IoT in a form really, really early on. And it's just kind of developed. And what I was touching on before the start is that technology has evolved really from being an enabler for, guys and girls to do their best work through to a real performance differentiator on the car.
Sure.
So what we're starting to see, in my opinion, is a sort of a transition where typically you needed a great car and you needed a great driver. If you had one or the other, you're still going to be pretty competitive. I think there's this third pillar where you need a great technology platform to try and, really maximize the potential. You've got maybe no longer do you have the great best car and the best driver if you haven't got that underpinning technology platform and some of the advanced technologies that are coming out. I think you're going to start to see performance impacts. Now, whether you're seeing that today or whether you're going to see that in years to come, remains to be seen. But I think it's starting to become that third pillar.
And of course, F1 is unique because people are looking for some degree of competition.
Yep.
And yet there's a parallel between what you're saying between F1 and the digital workplace in terms of that dynamic between technology and talent. And I wonder do you reflect upon that parallelism and how?
I mean, I like it because I'm a technologist. So, technology can start being a real business impactor.
Yeah,
So I think, I think all businesses and Formula One, maybe has been doing this for a while and is used to it, but businesses are consuming data at an alarming rate in a good way. And there's different people on those data journeys. You've got businesses maybe less mature in that space who are realizing they can start to gather data across their ecosystem, whether that's, through product sale or understanding customers or understanding the workforce or the financials, through to much more mature organizations who know what data they've got and are using technology now to give themselves an advantage in their industry and everything in between. So as we start to see that transition of, data becoming really quite powerful and valuable, actually, we're seeing a lot of industries understanding quite how lucrative data can be for them. Then you're going to start to see this huge shift in technology if we're not seeing that already. Whereas roll back the clock a little bit, IT departments, quote unquote, were always seen as providers of IT equipment and consumers of spend. Now I think a lot of CEOs are looking over at their technology group and saying, you can actually increase my revenue, or you can bring in efficiencies, and you can start using that data that we're busy collecting to ultimately grow the business. That's that shift.
And I mean, as much as we think, okay, we want to see some vestige of like human competition in F1, but that there's not that emphasis on the digital workplace. We just want to see the most efficient digital workplace possible. And you might think that, okay, therefore technology is going to predominate more and more and more. The irony is talent acquisition and retention has never been more competitive than it is presently, right? Even in your space. So.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's suffering with this, in technology in particular. Because you're starting to see that big shift in terms of digital departments growing, and you're starting to see quite a number of C-suite titles develop across the technology space as well. You need talent underneath those groups to underpin them all. Now people, I think we've seen a big shift from certainly in Formula One where, people would have come and worked in Formula One teams for free. Just desperate to get into the sport. Honestly, I think we're seeing a shift now where, lots of great people have great choices, and Formula One is just one of many choices, and we have to work harder to attract the best people, because the competition is so tight. Again, we were talking about it earlier. With such marginal gains across the sport, everything has to be considered, and people obviously has one of the biggest impacts, if not the biggest impact. You got to have the best people in your camp to get the performance.
What are the main differentiators you're looking for as a hirer? Me
personally, I'm always looking for fit and character and culture. Yeah. I think I can teach most people. If somebody's willing to learn and they're willing to put in the time and the energy, I'm quite a high energy person, and so when I see people who are energetic, they might not have the skills that they need to do the job that I want them to do, but you can tell that they'll get them. Mm-hmm. And so, rather than, traditionally hiring the best minds in a particular space, now I'm looking for high energy, really good work ethic. And I think, if you've got some of those qualities, I can teach you technical skills, but I can't, it's really hard to teach some of those sort of softer skills. And I think at Haas F1, we spend maybe a little extra time looking outside of Formula One. I've had great success on my digital groups, bringing in guys and girls from other industries where they start to challenge ideas, whether that's coming out of aerospace or retail or charities. Another really good one, the non-profit sector is ultra efficient, and our business is all about efficiency. So yes, Formula One's experience is brilliant, but actually by bringing in a few people from other industries, we can learn and grow.
And efficiency is the essence of Haas F1, right? Like
it is,
you're punching above your weight, mega economical. How does that translate into what you're providing in terms of a technological infrastructure?
I think technology, it can have a really big impact in a little team like ours. As you say, we have to be ultra efficient because we don't have the human capital mainly to compete with some of the much bigger teams. But in order to be able to get a car that's competitive on track against some of those sort of more higher resource teams, we have to think a bit differently. We have to think a little bit more strategically, maybe have a little bit wider risk appetite. So when I bring that onto the technology stack, suddenly I've got a very low level of bureaucracy, very quick ability to react to emerging technologies or trend changes. To a degree, we can look at a technology platform and say, let's give it a go. So, some of the bigger teams maybe have a larger degree of risk management or parent companies and governance structures that they have to look at. We have the ability of saying, hey, let's give that a go. And if it works, great, we get the advantage. If it doesn't work, we try something different.
Is that true for the cars as well to some degree? Is that not really
Yeah, I think so. What you'll often see, with things like strategic decisions that we make on the pit wall, we'll often try things that maybe other teams won't. And, don't get me wrong, it doesn't always work out.
It's agility.
It's agility, and it's risk, and it's, trying to find competitive advantage without following, as I say, the beat of the drum of the other 9 teams. If we do that with less resources, it's a pretty uphill battle.
Unpack something for me, Gary. So I heard you mention it. You've got off-car tech and you've got in-car tech.
Yep.
I suppose it's kind of obvious what it means, but unpack it as detailed as you can. And then you've got what you described as the digital infrastructure arms race happening simultaneously to presumably the in-car tech arms race.
Yep.
You can tell I'm not really up with my terminology here, but come on, break it down.
Be in a little while.
Okay, go.
So peel that back a bit. So on-car technology is probably a wider concept than digital.
Not in-car tech, sorry.
Yes, on-car or in-car, largely the same.
Bit of both, yeah.
Yep,
yeah.
My engineering colleagues will probably debate that with me.
Gotcha.
But a lot of it, well, first of all, there's a few parts that are stock systems. So some of the electronics on car are actually the same across all of the cars.
Yeah.
So what you're starting to see across Formula One really over the last decade is quite a degree of cost management, trying to level the playing fields between teams that were traditionally had a lot more resources to smaller teams like us. So there's a lot of sort of common components being brought in. So you'll start to see a bit of a leveling out of some of those electronic systems, for example, and the data acquisition systems are all the same across the cars. But if we widen out from digital technology just to technology in general, there's some huge differentiators. We've seen some massive milestones over the years. In my career, there was the double diffuser in 2009, which was an aerodynamic sort of concept at the rear of the Brawn GP car. That's technology in my eyes. It's physical technology rather than digital, but it had a huge impact, and Brawn went on to win that World Championship at the end of 2009, and we've seen the F duct and the S duct and front to rear interconnected suspension. These are all technologies that teams have developed inside their kind of R&D labs, and that have given them huge performance advantages. So there's opportunity there. But when we talk about off-car and sort of digital infrastructure, where I see the impact there is twofold. One, that infrastructure is underpinning all of those, superstars at every F1 team who are coming up with all of these concepts. And, as I said, with the gains, marginal gains so sought after, tenths of a second or hundredths of a second are measured in meetings and accountable for, then the digital infrastructure that allows them to do that work becomes increasingly more important. If we say, for example, the IT systems at the racetrack, they control all the data acquisition systems. So, paraphrasing slightly, the car collects all the telemetry data, sends a bunch of it over the radio back to the garage, and that's distributed around the engineers. And they have to make these decisions in real time. The moment any of that technology platform has an issue, and suddenly that live data can't be seen, suddenly they can't tell the car is safe, for example. There's huge voltage systems on the car, there's huge and complex electronics on the car. And so there's, 20, 30, 40 engineers constantly watching that live data. And if the technology platform underneath has an issue and that data is cut off, it's not a great situation to be in. Some teams would retire the car for that. So that's a big shift. If we roll back 10 or 15 years, the technology and the digital infrastructure was important, but if you needed to get the car going, you could pretty much fire it up and send it around the track without all of those systems. That's gone now. So the reliance on digital infrastructure at the track, but even just as much really at the factory in order for people to be continuing working and developing the cars is mission critical.
How long has your total time in F1 been now in your career?
So this is my 20th year. Yeah. So, or 20th year in motorsport, I think is 18 years in F1.
Sure.
So.
What was the prehistory of his career in F1? Yeah, we'll get back to your childhood.
How far do you want to go back?
Yeah, let's go all the way back. All the way back, Gary. Come on.
Okay, so if I go all the way back, I've always been a car guy. From toddler upwards, four wheels, was where I wanted to be. And, coming through school and through college and ultimately university, I didn't really discover computing till quite late. But then, I grew up in the 80s, so computing was really basic back then.
Yeah.
I just wanted to work with cars. So my original degree idea was to do, automotive engineering or automotive mechanics, something along those lines. Academically, I wouldn't say I wasn't strong, but I was pretty lazy, I think, as a teenager. And so I didn't, looking back, I can be honest and say I didn't try very hard. So I thought, okay, am I going to get the grades to go to university? I was given a bit of a kick up the rear by the school, got my grades up. And in that sort of 2-year period, I started to discover computing.
Right.
So I started doing basic programming and I got really good at it really quickly through enjoying it. So honestly, I think I was very lucky to fall into motorsport because I had a love of computing and I did computer science at university. And I've always had this love for four wheels, but I never saw F1 as realistic. I mean, when I just wanted to work with cars. So my first job was actually working just in an IT support department, working for Cosworth. Cosworth at the time were making engines for what was then Jaguar Racing, which is what became Red Bull. Mm-hmm. So there was this loose F1 link, but I was not in the F1 arm. I remember I used to look over the walls and think those guys and girls were rock stars. So a year and a half later, I was at the track.
Nice. So. And you see a lot of parallelism between like engineering skills and IT skills, and where do you see the distinctions in terms of the type of intelligence you're applying?
Yeah, I think so. I think with engineering, one of the big synergies, and particularly with technology, it's always a learning journey. I learn every day, and you have to want to learn every day. There are there are facets of engineering, I think, that can rely on very traditional, very grassrooted skill sets. I think when you move into the digital space, you just have to be continuously learning, continuously, pushing, and that's a journey I enjoy. And if you're not learning, I think you get left behind.
From getting that early opportunity in working in an area you love, such as motorsports, to becoming a CIO, it's quite a journey. What would you say the main milestones were in that evolution of your career?
Probably first milestone is getting a job in Formula One. Yeah. That was a huge milestone. Lasted 6 months before Honda pulled out of F1. So that was, from landing the dream job
don't
to
take
being...
it personally, okay.
Landing the dream job to 2/3 of the company being made redundant was another milestone, I guess. But interestingly, I survived that through essentially a side hustle. So although I was working for Honda F1 in 2008, doing IT support, behind the scenes I was very good at website programming and doing media work, nothing more than personal interest. And so when Honda pulled out and 2,000 odd people went down to 400, I was lucky because I got this second skill set that they needed, because they were spending a fortune on websites and website marketing, and I kind of put my hand up and said, keep me, because I can do this as well. Yeah. And that's, I think, a skill set that I've enjoyed throughout my career, and very much so at Haas in my current role today, whereby I've always been happy to put my hand up and say, do you know what, I'll take a go at that. Might not be in my core skill set, but I'll give it a go. So at Haas I look after facilities now. I look after sustainability. I look after enterprise applications, and that's really because as the business has grown, I've been there and the guy to put my hand up and say I'll give it a go. Throughout, when I managed to stay when it became Brawn GP, 2009. Then Mercedes took over Brawn at the end of 2009, and I stayed there and sort of worked my way through the IT department to effectively a deputy head level. And I joined Haas at the time against probably everybody's advice going. Oh, yeah? Yeah, well, new teams traditionally in Formula One had not lasted too long.
I guess you'd already had reasons to be a little shy as well, a little hesitant.
It was high risk. I think even the CIO at Mercedes, pulled me to one side and said, what are you doing here? This might not end well for you. But I worked hard in my notice period, which was fairly lengthy, and left the door wide open, which was a nice place to be. And Haas worked out really good. So took a bit of a risk. I'm not a massive risk taker when it comes to career decisions, but this one worked out good.
From being on the outside of F1 and maybe motorsports in general to being very much an insider inside the industry, what were some of the big surprises or differences in terms of your expectations of what that would be like to what it was actually like?
So I had no real massive expectations because I did fall into it quite suddenly, for want of a better word. I think, seeing the technology behind the scenes quite early on, it really was super far advanced. And especially sort of 15, 20 years ago, there was quite a lot more money in Formula One floating around. Some of the big teams had, huge budgets. And so there was this, as a technologist, if you needed something, some infrastructure, some software, or you wanted to play a concept out within reason, the money was there to just make it happen. So that was quite fun and quite engaging, because even as a junior member of staff, if you came up with an idea, the leadership would say, hey, that might work. Here's a bunch of money, go and see. It's a bit more under control these days with cost caps, and rightly so. We saw a huge exit of big manufacturer teams. Around was it 2008 when we saw Honda, BMW, Toyota, all come out of the sport, because I think when the board looked at the number that they were spending and then maybe what it was bringing back, it didn't line up. So cost control is good, but then cost was just not even something you really talked about. It was all about performance on track. So that was maybe a bit of a surprise.
Sure, yeah, makes sense.
And work ethic maybe. A funny story I remember.
People are very chill, in fact.
Well, it was just super hard graft.
Yes, I'm sure.
That's not a complaint. But I remember, I'd been used to, when I was working in IT, your 5:30 end of the day came along,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
started
yeah.
to pack your stuff up and you left. I remember very clearly my first day at Honda. Got to 5:30 and I'm in a room of like 60 IT engineers. Nobody's moving. And I remember looking at my watch and I said to the guy or girl next to me, I said, hey, what time does the day end? And they were like, oh, no one leaves before 9. I was like, texting my girlfriend at the time, going to be a bit late.
For the next 10 years. Yeah,
and it honestly was like that.
Yeah,
it was, you adjust quickly. So it's work hard, play hard. It's a great place to be. It's not for everyone though.
Yeah, I mean, how much, you were talking to a young technologist, and how much would you recommend they're lending their vocation to something they're passionate about, such as you've been able to? How much of a difference does that realistically make?
So I spend a lot of, a huge perk of my job now is I spend a lot of time doing STEM initiatives and coaching and mentoring younger generations of future engineers. And honestly, aside from the how did you get into F1 question, quite a lot of young engineers are saying, what's Formula One like? What's it going to be? And my advice to them is always, if you want to come and work in F1, don't take a career path or education system that you think you need to get into Formula One. Do what you enjoy or you're passionate about, and in a weird way, that comes back to that energy. If you think, in order to get into Formula One, I've got to do mechanical engineering, but actually you're really good at creative, or you're really good at finance, or you're really good at, and you enjoy it and you get up and you give that energy every day, that's what we look for. And I think, if you enjoy your job, those 12, 13-hour days as normal, they're okay because you're enjoying it.
When you look back at the career to date, what are those milestone moments where you felt, I guess, not only chills thinking about it, but you felt completely included and kind of enveloped in the team and the achievements of the team?
Oh, we've had a few good moments over the years. I mean, probably for my career, the standout was winning the championship in 2009 against all odds. The Brawn story is well told, so we don't need to go into it in huge detail, other than to say it was a really tough year. We had huge redundancies across the company. Great people who built the car that was winning. We mustn't forget that the 2008 staff built the 2009 car. And then it started winning every race. And it was an amazing season, but also a really tough season at the same time. The performance of the team dropped off towards the tail end of the year. Red Bull developed their own double diffuser, as did a few of the other teams eventually. And it got tight. So when we got over the line and we won a world championship, I know, I'd only been in the sport a couple of years. It was an amazing feeling, one that maybe will never be repeated. But rolling forward, I had some great seasons with Mercedes. We won lots of races, a few more championships. Haas was a great feeling as well, being part of a team from the start and having the ability to really impact that. And then to come out in Australia 2016 and be so high up, for the finishing points was also a great feeling.
What do you think defines a great CIO specifically in F1, as perhaps against other industries? I'm sure you know a lot of CIOs elsewhere, and is it much of a muchness in terms of the talent and skill set, or do you actually see some specificity in what you do?
Oh yeah, I think a bit of both really. Behind the scenes we have the same challenges that every CIO across the country has, and I spend a few times. We were talking about the CIO event last week that your CEO presented at. And I talk to other CEOs in other sectors, and they share challenges. We're all worried about cybersecurity. We're all trying to understand the hype curve of AI and how it can affect our businesses and keep our CEOs happy. So on that side of things, I think there's a very common set of challenges and skills. I think where Formula One is maybe a little unique is the pressures of a race week, 24 times a year. Everything comes together, and 100 odd million people or so tune in and watch it, and you've got to enjoy that experience, and not everyone does. And when it works, it's brilliant. Every CIO will tell you when the technology platform's operating, brilliant. Sit back with a cup of coffee. When it's not working, it's hugely visual and hugely impactful.
And to what extent do you feel that IT is able to touch every part of what an F1 team does, from factory to the pit wall? Where are those conjoining kind of relationships most kind of tangible?
So, F1 is complete. We touched on data driven, but I think F1 is the almost the pinnacle of a data driven sport. Certainly, in my opinion, the most technology driven sport. And so, when you've got all of that data and all of those stakeholders needing it in order to perform, whether that's real time at the track, sometimes it's not uncommon for an engineer to be taking in 30 or 40 data points mentally and have a second to make a decision that could be race affecting. And so, we're constantly trying to refine that data stream, make sure it's available, make sure the right people have the right data, maybe the right people, that certain data doesn't get to certain people to avoid that sort of data blindness, and just the mission critical nature of it. And it's not just at the track, the technology at the track is incredible, but we push all of that data then back to our fixed sites. In our case at Haas, we have the UK, we have Italy, and we have the US. And so we're pushing data streams in three directions to more engineers, adding more value and having more impact on the circuit. And all of that has to be working in harmony to get the car out on track.
And I suppose it just makes this kind of contrast a little bit sharper, but the question of how you balance short-term performance demands with those long-term tech strategy at large. How do you strike and maintain that?
I think we try and maintain a degree of stability from race to race. So a lot of work goes into risk analysis. If we're, for instance, pushing out a technology change, it has to be really well proven before it goes to the circuit and goes into a production environment. No dissimilar to other industries there, I'm sure. But behind the scenes, we were talking before we started that the moment you stop innovating, or the moment you stop pushing that technology boundary, is the day your competitors leapfrog you. So there's this constant battle. You always need to be moving forward, but actually you need to be moving forward at the same or greater pace than your competitors, because anything less is actually moving backwards.
Soul of the CIO is sponsored by Nexthink. Now, if you work in IT, you'll know too well how disruptions can derail productivity fast. Nexthink's AI-powered platform for digital employee experience keeps you ahead. It uncovers issues others can't see and resolves them automatically with employee-centric AI and always-on automation. Employees stay productive, IT stays proactive and even preventative, and leadership sees results. Nexthink, ahead of every IT disruption, behind every strategy. Learn more at nexthink.com. We've kind of touched upon this, the way that F1 is serves as a sort of metaphor for business today. You've got high-speed, data-driven, it's always evolving. How do you see the parallels between running tech in F1 and in any modern high-performance business writ large?
I think we're in an age now where technology is the differentiator. So we've completely morphed. You see the term digital transformation bounced around a lot. I think it's overused sometimes, but the concept of digital transformation is taking a technology service to your workforce or your business, and morphing it more into a business partner role, where you're actually saying, okay, what is the business producing? What does it need? How do we bring technology into the boardroom effectively? And say, okay, not only will the tech service, laptops, desktops, that's fine. That's the easy stuff. How can we use technology to impact the business positively, whether that's through efficiency, through increased sales, or in our world, car performance, which is what we seek. And so we've got these sort of almost two facets where they are materially different, I think. You've got the IT service portion, absolutely critical, of course. Then you've got this second business enablement portion where your CIO or your CTO is saying, technology can have a positive impact on the business.
And another area technology can have a positive impact on is sustainability and diversity, right? I mean, I think from the outside, sometimes F1 can maybe look a bit of a macho kind of work. You imagine a kind of macho maybe.
We're getting better at that.
Yeah, well, exactly. So tell us about how you're playing a role in that specifically.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I'm lucky at Haas. I wear a few hats, and one of them is to oversee sustainability. Not a sustainability expert at all. Again, I was the guy that put my hand up a couple of years ago and said, I'd love to learn that. I'd love to take it on and drive it forward, but by no means an expert in it. But Formula One, I think, has turned a corner in the last 5 to 7 years at least, maybe a bit longer, whereby it's recognised two things. One, there was a lot of change to make, a lot of work to do across whether that's carbon reduction, whether that's inclusion, right through to understanding that it's got a huge platform. We race in all these different countries, a huge demographic as well. One could argue far wider in the birth of Drive to Survive and what have yous. So the demographic of who's watching F1 is stretched hugely across age and gender, and what we're seeing now is that platform, it can be a great force for good. That's why I'm passionate about it, because I look at even our smaller team, and I think we can have impact if we're demonstrating responsibility across all these facets of sustainability and ESG. Then maybe people will look at us as responsible parties when they watch the race Sunday 24 times a year, and say, okay, yeah, we should be doing something too. The ability to influence. So whilst there's still huge to do, we know we still fly big jumbo jets around the world. So it's quite easy to call out F1 as unsustainable. I'm really proud of what the sport is doing at a whole level. That's teams, or rights holders, broadcasters, circuits. The whole ecosystem is making huge changes.
Very cool. And if you had to, where do you see CIOs as being most central to the future success of F1? Like, what is the most integral connection to any team's success?
I think the technology just continues to evolve, and we're seeing in the birth of AI and Gen AI in particular, we're seeing another technology that can have a huge performance impact if it's deployed correctly. And so when we talked about that tech arms race at the start there, something that I think you're starting to see is that people are realizing that technology can have direct car performance impact. And so as the role of the CIO is going to morph, if it hasn't done already, from a provider of mission critical digital platforms, that's something we do today, through to this kind of business partner where we need to support and underpin the business to work better, more efficiently, and provide direct value, i.e., lap time to the car. So it's a big morph, but one that I think as long as we don't lose the DNA of the sport, we touched on that earlier, didn't we? Where there's a degree of technology could sterilize the sport a bit, which we don't want. That's definitely on the sports agenda. But until we get to that point, I think a CIO can play a really critical role, along with so many other amazing departments, on getting lap time.
And if you mentioned your mentorship that you're involved in at the moment. When you talk to young, ambitious technologists, what's your main advice to them as they look ahead to a career 5, 10, 20 years in technology to come?
I think I come back to that. Enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
And hit it every day with maximum energy, because if you're enjoying what you're doing, it's not a chore anymore. It's fun. And if you're doing what you're doing and it's fun, you just go that extra mile. So I always say to people, keep on top of technology trends, make sure you're enjoying it, you're immersing yourself in that world. We touched on it earlier, learn every day, be really honest about learning, and don't be afraid to ask, for guidance. I do it every day. I'm not ashamed to say at all that I love being, a mentor, but I also have mentors. And I love asking them questions and getting guidance from them, because, if you're not on that learning journey, I think in technology in particular, you're going to get left behind.
Amazing. Garrett, you've got an amazing position in an industry you're obviously completely in love with. What's your favorite thing about your job?
I get to work with computers and race cars.
Yeah.
I mean, what's not to love? So, yeah, I've done it for 20 years. Wouldn't change it for the world.
Gary, you mentioned those stress points that come with the races themselves. But for a CIO, what's a race day actually look like, and how involved are you in that point, and how passive is it at that point?
Yeah, so I guess as a CIO, like most CIOs, I'm always on call. I'm always got an eye on the operations. But honestly, I got a great team who travel to all the races. I've earned those stripes. I'm not sure I'd want to go back. And they go 24 times a year, and they run the mission critical infrastructure. I'm there really for accountability, to understand risk and help make decisions. Generally speaking, on a race Sunday, if my phone rings, it's not good news, because they know what they're doing. If anything, when I come to the circuit, and I go to a few races a year, they're normally saying, "Hey, Gary, don't touch anything," So on a race Sunday, I typically just keeping on top of the race. I enjoy it. I still love racing. So I'll be watching the race on a Sunday, keeping my eye on emails and laptops. And if I need to make a call or jump on something, which does happen from time to time, sure, then I'm available.
Any horror stories from a race day?
Loads. How long have you got? No, I jest. Do you know what? Touch wood, the technology platform hasn't stopped the car leaving. That's maybe, the worst case scenario, and very possible, and has happened at other teams. And, when the technology platform becomes so mission critical, it's not out of the question that a small, tiny blip somewhere along the lines brings down the data acquisition or data distribution platforms, and then they can't start the car, or they can't tell the car's safe, and they won't run it. That's nightmare scenario. But honestly, when that happens, no amount of waving your arms in the air and getting stressed about it is going to fix it. So generally speaking, my role there is to guide and focus the team and make sure that the right people with the right skill sets are working on the right areas. And as I said, I've got a fantastic team underneath me who will move heaven and earth to make sure, A, that doesn't happen in the first place, but B, if it does happen, we're just straight on it to get it sorted.
And I guess during those race days, you've already mentioned it, is what we might call the race telemetry, yep. I suppose. I mean, maybe you could unpack just what kind of scale of data are we talking about here, and what are the challenges that it presents to your team?
So starting on the car, we have a bunch of physical sensors, right? So across the car, I think there's about 250, 300 or so now. Things like pressure sensors, temperature sensors, strain gauges. So that's sensors that are measuring the flexibility of carbons under load. And all of that data points are feeding back onto an onboard computer. Some of those sensors run at 1 hertz, but we've got some running up to 10,000 hertz. So that's 10,000 data points in a single second. So they all come back and they're gathered up on the car. We loosely split that into 2 tracks. We have the real-time data. So a subset of that data acquisition is sent in real time over the radio system. Okay, so as the car's going around the track, it's constantly sending data out. Other than voice radio, we don't allow any data sent to the car. It's all one way out, so car outwards. So the days of remotely programming the car are all over. So all of those data points come over the radio system, and they're distributed back into the garage. And then the IT systems behind the scenes are sort of carving that data up and sending the right data to the right person. If you've got a strategist on the pit wall, that guy or girl needs very specific data points, aligned maybe with video feeds. If you've got a reliability engineer in the race truck or a mechanic, then they have different data streams as well. And they are all looking and making decisions based on that data. Let's say, hypothetically, we see gearbox pressures starting to increase. There is an engineer watching that, and that engineer's got the decision to make. Is there an adjustment we can make to the car to get the pressures under control? Is there a failure? Is there a safety element and we have to pull the car straight over? So it's giving them that real-time insight. That's sort of track 1. We also send that data back out to our fixed sites. So we have another set of superstars that work remotely without all the travel burden and expense and carbon footprint. And they are also receiving that telemetry stream, and again they're adding value, but they're just doing it from back at base.
What new things is AI making possible in terms of the sifting and analysis of that data presently?
So AI is great at being able to start to narrow data sets down a little bit. It's more of a machine learning approach, whereby when we've got all this huge data and as I say, you've got that first data stream comes live, there is like a second data stream that sits on the car, which is where even more sensors that we don't transmit over radio bandwidth limitations more than anything, is stored on the car. Car comes back into the garage and we kind of suck that data off, and it becomes, it's not uncommon to get a terabyte of data over 2 or 3 days. Video as well is a huge performance impactor, especially with 4K video. Huge pain in my backside because the data volumes are so big. So we've got all this subset of data, and then you've got engineers that are going to start working on more, comparative data. So maybe comparing lap to lap. You've got engineers using some of that data to look at more longer term car development and aerodynamic understanding. So, whilst the cars are collecting all of this huge data source, it can be 500,000 data points a second is not uncommon. Somewhere somebody's using that data, whether that's in real time on the pit wall or in the garage or later on.
Amazing. But no plans for self-driving cars just yet?
No, there's already a series for that. I think Formula One's on a tightrope actually, in terms of making sure that it remains a very technologically relevant sport. And there's huge interest in it, and we pioneer so many amazing technologies, and should continue to do so. Where the balance will tip is if it starts to lose the DNA of human, creativity, human mistake, human, emotion. And that's what we tune in for on a Sunday. The fans love the technology, but let's be honest, when the cars are racing each other on track, it's emotions that we're looking for.
And personalities.
And sport. That's what sport's about. If you make it too technology-led, cars start to look the same, drivers have lower impact, team personnel aren't pushed and challenged, so we're not going to attract the greatest minds. And then you see the DNA of the sport shift. That's the point we don't want to go past.